Tonight, it sure ain't a witch hunt anymore. Michael Cohen pleads guilty, implicates his former client, President Trump. This, as Paul Manafort hears the word guilty 8 times from a federal jury. We focus on all the president's problems for the full hour. Former federal prosecutor analyzes the president's legal problems. And we wait for action from Congress. Any action. What can and should Congress be doing? And the better question is, what will they actually do? Will they do anything at all? We'll go under the dome from analysis with ABC News political director Rick Klein. Plus, we're going to take a look at all of Trump's problems in total. What could come next? What shoe could drop? Could a sitting president actually be indicted? What about Trump's Supreme Court nominee who says presidents not only can't be charged with a crime, they shouldn't even be investigated? Our legal panel will get into it all. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Boy, do we have a lot of legal issues to get to. It was already one of the most scandal-plagued and ethically challenged administrations and presidents. Today, President Trump looks to dig out of what may be the most scandal-plagued moment of his entire presidency, and that says a mouthful. This all coming after one of the more jaw-dropping moments in recent presidential history yesterday. Trump's former campaign manager, Paul Manafort, found guilty of 8 counts of tax and bank fraud charges with another trial awaiting him, and increased pressure on Manafort to cooperate with Robert Mueller. Minutes later, Trump's former personal attorney, Michael Cohen, pleading guilty to his own 8 counts. Among them, that Trump ordered and directed Cohen to pay off 2 women who have claimed to have had affairs with the president. Now, for the principal purpose of avoiding or influencing, I should say, the 2016 election was what was driving those payments. Now, both the president and the White House playing defense today and attacking Michael Cohen as well. President Trump implicated in the campaign finance crimes of his former lawyer and fixer, Michael Cohen. The president now speaking out, telling Fox News that the campaign finance violations Cohen pled guilty to are not crimes.
My first question when I heard about it was, did they come out of the campaign? Because that could be a little dicey. And they didn't come out of the campaign.
White House spokesperson Sarah Sanders saying the president did nothing wrong.
Just because Michael Cohen made a plea deal doesn't mean that implicates the president on anything.
The president lashing out on Twitter, of course, accusing Cohen of making up stories in order to strike a deal with prosecutors. He even mocked the man who worked for him for over a decade, tweeting, "If anyone is looking for a good lawyer, I would strongly suggest that you don't retain the services of Michael Cohen." Cohen faces jail time after pleading guilty in federal court Monday to 8 counts, including making illegal campaign contributions, quote, in coordination and at the direction of a candidate for federal office, end quote. While not naming the president, Cohen apparently referred to payments made weeks before the election to porn star Stormy Daniels and former Playboy model Karen McDougal for their silence over the alleged affairs. Now Republicans forced to answer for the president.
Well, these are serious charges, and they can't be ignored.
Do you think it's high crimes and misdemeanors?
I wouldn't go that far just yet.
Cohen's lawyer, Lanny Davis, rejecting the possibility of a presidential pardon.
He will not and does not want anything from Donald Trump.
Now, one more portion of the president's appearance on Fox and Friends this morning worth reviewing, since that's what the president's most ardent supporters are watching. Trump, he denied knowing about the payments that Cohen made before he made them.
Did you know about the payments?
Later on I knew, later on. But you have to understand, Ainsley, what he did, and they weren't taken out of campaign finance. That's a big thing. That's a much bigger thing. Did they come out of the campaign? They didn't come out of the campaign. They came from me, and I tweeted about it.
Just one problem with that explanation. We know it is a bald-faced lie. Again, you hear what he said, he didn't know anything about this till after the fact. Here is Trump, who, by the way, Rudy Giuliani acknowledged that was his voice in the recording I'm about to play for you. This is Trump, recorded secretly by Cohen, that the White House allowed to be released, where Trump and Cohen discussed the payments before they happen.
Correct. So I'm all over that. And I spoke to Alan about it when it comes time for the financing, which will be...
Listen, what financing?
We'll have to pay you. So no. I got no.
A lot to unpack after Cohen's guilty plea and Manafort's conviction. We're going to dedicate the bulk of this entire program to analysis of what this all means, where we go from here, the next shoes that could possibly drop. But first, let's start with the legalities. What does this mean? What happened yesterday? How much jeopardy could the president now be in? And again, where we go from here. For answers, let's bring in our first guest, former federal prosecutor Roland Riopelle. He joins us live from Manhattan. And before we even get into some of the specifics, Roland, it was so seismic yesterday when you saw a split screen of Manafort down in Virginia and Cohen, in southern New York, that you have the campaign manager and the personal attorney of them both pleading and being found guilty. To say it was seismic, I think, an understatement here. Do you agree with me that we're going to remember August 21st, 2018, not just in context with Trump, but a major day in American history?
Yes, nothing like this has ever happened to a president before. I mean, the score is now 16 for Robert Mueller and 0 for Trump. And that's a pretty big inning for Robert Mueller and the Southern District of New York. Trump has a long way to go to pull out of this particular problem.
And Roland, when you heard the statement from the U.S. Attorney yesterday, to me, I don't think you have to read between the lines to see, at least in his view and others, while he was speaking about a specific case, he was talking about it being a vindication for the rule of law. It seemed to me that the Justice Department and the FBI, they were being spoken for yesterday when those guilty verdicts were handed down.
I think that's exactly right. This was a real victory for process and the law, and it was a terrible defeat for autocracy and Trump. That's what it was.
Let's talk first Manafort, and then we'll get to Cohen, which probably is the more damning here. But with Manafort, obviously, I don't think too obliquely the president basically throwing giant hints that there's a pardon waiting for him for the other side. If you were counseling Manafort, would you count on that pardon? Would you consider becoming a cooperating witness, in effect, here with the Mueller folks? What do you do if you're Manafort right now? And then we'll get into the specifics of that a pardon isn't necessarily a completely get-out-of-jail-free card.
Right. If I'm Manafort's lawyer, I sort of lay out all his options for him and tell him, you can hang tough and I'll hang tough with you and hope for a pardon at the end. But boy, you sure can't count on that, because the political pressure on the president not to grant a pardon to you is going to be very intense. He's going to understand that if he pardons you now, that could end his presidency. It could create a backlash in Congress, particularly if there's a changeover in the House. It could trigger an impeachment. So you just can't count on it. Another option here is to think hard and long about cooperating with the government, and that's something you have to consider. Those are Manafort's options for ways out of this at this point.
And obviously, as you've said here before, and you were the first one to say it, I'll acknowledge that. Others are now that his former clients in the Eastern Bloc, they will not be fond of him spilling any secrets here. So there's a consideration beyond just Donald Trump that he's got some worries. If he cooperates, he may not be with us too long. Now, talk about how if he gets a pardon from the president, that doesn't necessarily end his legal exposure here, how all of a sudden a subpoena could come down the pike and he couldn't plead the fifth.
That's exactly right. And in fact, Barbara Underwood, and I know you're going to get into this later, has now subpoenaed Michael Cohen now that he's pled guilty. And she might well subpoena Paul Manafort if there was a pardon and try to get information from him as well. So without a Fifth Amendment right, once Paul Manafort's gotten a pardon, he will have no federal Fifth Amendment right to assert. He'll have to respond to Mr. Mueller's questions. If he refuses to do so, that'll be a contempt of court, and he can actually be imprisoned for that until such time as he's ready to purge his contempt by testifying. So he could go to jail for an indeterminate length of time, and perhaps a very lengthy one, if he refuses to respond to Mr. Mueller after getting a pardon. So a pardon's not going to help Manafort that much, and the truth is, it may not help Trump that much either.
And by the way, Manafort doesn't have the option to say, fine, I'll recognize the subpoena if in fact he's pardoned, and then weave any fanciful story. If he doesn't tell the truth, he's in a lot of hot water.
That's a perjury count every time you lie, and every time that Mueller can prove it beyond a reasonable doubt, that's another perjury count. So yes, if he got a subpoena and had no Fifth Amendment right, he would have to tell the truth or risk a series of perjury counts. Mr. Manafort's in a corner.
Now let's get to Mr. Cohen. And again, just even in isolation, I think we're so inured to all this bombardment of unprecedented news, but he directly said the President of the United States was a co-conspirator here in a crime. It was stunning, that statement, when you read through it. And he also says he's got a lot more information for Mr. Mueller that he believes would not be helpful from his former employer, Mr. Trump.
Yeah, you know, I have to say, Richard, it is astonishing to me how Mr. Cohen's lawyer, Mr. Davis, is wading into the press to say these things. That is so contrary to the typical practice for a seasoned criminal defense lawyer to do that kind of thing, go out in the press and start making statements like that. He's the defense version of Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah, I was going to ask you that, Roland. I was going to say, I wouldn't want my attorney to say, I wouldn't want a pardon even if you offered me one. You're still negotiating. Your first primary concern, if you're Lanny Davis, is Michael Cohen. It's not making a political point, right?
It should be, but Richard, I wonder about that. I wonder if Lanny Davis has divided loyalties and is doing a lot of this as a publicity stunt on behalf of the Clintons, who have been his patrons for so many years. It is malpractice for a real criminal defense lawyer to say, I wouldn't accept a pardon. I don't want a pardon. Are you kidding me? If somebody gives you a pardon, you take it and run like the thief in the night that you are. You don't make a statement like that. And by the way, if you want to make a deal with the Southern District of New York, you take your hat in your hand, you go down there, you meet with them behind closed doors, you have an adult discussion with them, and you don't lob crazy allegations around in the press. That just makes it more difficult for you to be able to cooperate, because it's generating potential cross-examination for your adversary if you do testify. The whole thing is mashugana, to use the legal term.
Now, what's the worst nightmare here for Trump as it relates to Michael Cohen? Again, for folks who forget, for the better part of a decade, he was the personal fixer here for Trump, and we already know of 2 hush payments here that he made to try and keep, you know, both the porn star and the Playboy model quiet about the affairs that they had with the president. What more here could he basically corroborate or even volunteer that would be very problematic for the president?
Well, the one thing that we know that Mr. Davis has blurted out in the press, which again is something that should have been filtered to the Southern District behind closed doors, in my opinion, is that Michael Cohen, if called to testify, will testify that Donald Trump knew about the June meeting with the Russians between Donald Jr., Paul Manafort, and the Russians, where there was a discussion of the Magnitsky Act, that Donald Trump knew about that beforehand. Now, we don't know exactly what Michael Cohen's proof of that might be, whether he has some kind of tape recording that will show it, some email that will show it, some diary entry that will show it, but that's the claim. And if that's so, that's a devastating claim against Trump, because it shows then Trump in direct collusion with the Russians, with knowledge that his son will be meeting with a Russian agent to discuss matters relating to the election and hopefully receive goods, the goods from the Russian agents. That right there is a felony, and Trump's right in the middle of it, just as he is, according to Cohen, with respect to the campaign finance violations that relate to Stormy Daniels and the other young woman.
Yep. Now, in terms of next shoes that could drop, apparently the president was set off in many ways even before Monday afternoon came down, because at least the reporting is he felt walls were closing in on his immediate family, most specifically Donald Trump Jr. Talk about why he may be the next person in the crosshairs of Mueller.
Donald Trump Jr., I think we've been predicting for months, is sort of a zombie, right? He's a walking dead man because of his meeting with the Russians to obtain information from them, from the Russian government, relating to the election and the defeat of Hillary Clinton. That right there is a conspiracy to violate the campaign finance laws right off the bat. We know that Donald Jr., perhaps with the coaching of his dad, has lied repeatedly about this meeting and probably lied to Congress, lied to law enforcement agents about it. And so there's a whole slew of charges that could come out against Donald Jr. arising out of that June 2016 meeting. And that's just for starters. You know, again, to go back to Ms. Underwood, she's got an investigation of the Trump Foundation that appears to touch on every family member in the Trump family, including Donald Jr. And there's just so much more I think they can probably pursue him on in connection with the campaign and the connection to the Russians, that I think he is in real trouble, and he's in the foreground. As well as Roger Stone, I think, is the next person that they're going to really go after, the two of them.
Roland, if the president broke out his pardon pad, and you went already into some of the political consequences that it might do, but if the president first and foremost couldn't give a rip about what happens to Republicans in the midterms in November, he's not even thinking beyond that. He just wants to make sure you know, he covers for family or others. When would that most likely happen? And explain how pardons work in terms of when they can be issued, even preemptively, theoretically. Should we be waiting for this after the Mueller probe is finished, or even before?
You know, a whole lot of this is going to be a competition, Richard, between the political pressure on Mr. Trump and the personal pressure he feels with respect to someone like his son, Donald Jr., for example. There'll be intense political pressure not to grant a pardon to his son, because that's going to just look terrible. And you're absolutely right, a pardon can be granted prospectively before any crime is charged. Indeed, that's exactly what happened with respect to Richard Nixon. You know, your viewers will recall that Nixon resigned and was pardoned very soon after by Gerald Ford. And if he had not been pardoned, once he had resigned the presidency, there's no reason he couldn't be indicted for obstruction of justice. So President Ford sort of cut that off at the pass by pardoning Nixon before an indictment was returned. Trump could do that with respect to Donald Jr. and sort of cut off any possibility that he could be indicted in the federal system. But I think the political pressure, if he tries to do that before the Mueller probe is done, will be so intense, and it may trigger an impeachment. On the other hand, afterward, once you see what the charges are, they may be so damning, the political pressure may overcome him again. He's in a very difficult situation.
And last thing, I think after Monday, for those who are saying witch hunt and a rigged system, et cetera, I'm sure there's still some voices out there, but they're not nearly as loud, and there won't be any support, or minimal at least, on the Hill for that, one would hope. When do you think Mueller, since he does seem more bulletproof now, when do you think he wraps this up? After the midterms or before?
it's very hard to predict because, in my view, Richard, the most key evidence, the stuff that is really going to be the final straw in all this is the sort of coordination and connection between the Trump campaign and the Russians with respect to the Russians' social media campaign through Facebook and the like during the election. There has to be a connection there. Running that down, I think, is going to take some time. There's probably been a great deal of computer forensic work done on that score, and I think it's not going to be resolved until well after the midterm elections are over. I think we won't see the final charges in this case until 2019. I wouldn't be at all surprised.
As the former U.S. Attorney said, stay tuned, and I think that's apropos here. Roland, as always, thank you, my friend. I appreciate it.
Pleasure to be with you, Richard.
Now we're going to bring in our legal panel here with a lot of questions. And trust me, New York could be a big player in all of this. We're going to get into that coming up. But when we come back next, a shift to the political. A president accused of breaking the law to cover up alleged tawdry behavior and maybe more. We've seen this before. There was no end to the contempt Republicans had for Bill Clinton almost 20 years ago to the day. They sprung into action. They impeached the president. So the question is, what will today's Congress do? Or will they do anything at all? We're going to talk to ABC political director Rick Klein straight ahead.